Welcome to Collars and Calluses, a working theology for young men, where grit meets grace and faith meets the workbench, where young men can come to learn how to grow in the strength, wisdom, and courage that God calls them to. In a world confused about manhood, we open God's Word and roll up our sleeves. We'll talk theology that's not just for the classroom, but for the job site, the gym, the family table, and the front lines of life. We are about forging biblical masculinity that works in the real world for real men to the glory of God. This is Collars and Calluses. Let's get to work. Welcome to another episode of Collars and Calluses. Rich and I are here back with you. Again, we're answering questions. We had several questions, but the questions are taking some time to answer, so we're just plodding through them as we go here. And just to remind you, you can still ask questions if you wish, and we will probably have another episode in the future or have episodes in the future where we answer those questions. Our contact information is down in the show notes, and so you can email those questions or find us on social media and direct message us. That'll be just fine. Today, we're going to be answering some situational questions. I'm not going to reveal the names of those who asked the question, but I am going to present their questions here, and then Rich and I will talk about what to do, because a lot of these are about just the situations of life and what do you do in this situation? What do you do in that situation? And so we're going to dig right into that. So a man writes and asks, I feel as though my generation of young men, the 20s and 30s, grew up with little guidance on vocations. By and large, our parent guidance on vocations and callings were get good grades and go to college. Now we have realized that college was largely a waste of time unless you were pursuing a very specific credentialed career path, that is ministry, doctor, engineer. I think it would be helpful to give advice to some fictional characters who say, I'm on board 100% with the principles of the Dominion Mandate and men's responsibility. But what do I do now? And he then presents three fictional characters that he thinks would capture a lot of that. And we're going to deal with these scenario by scenario. So the first one is, he says, a young man is 18 years of age. He has a young lady in the church he's planning to marry in the next 2 years, and he wants to be able to provide for her and unlikely future children. His father has a career in government acquisition contracts and can't really transfer any of that career to his son or bring him in. Where does he start? Now, that may be a fictional character, but that sounds like he might know somebody like that, because I don't know too many people who just think of government acquisition contracts right out of their heads. But so there might be an actual scenario that he's talking about. So with that, Rich, where do you want to start with this?
Well, let me start with this, because I'll just make kind of a larger point, which what you just read kind of gets at, and that is, I do agree. You've got a lot of young men and women today who have been given, well, let me put it this way. They've been underparented and specifically underfathered. And one way that manifests itself is in the lack of vocational direction that has been given. One of the things I think a father must do is prepare his son to go out into the world and make a productive living. Basically, when you think about the book of Proverbs, we've talked about this again and again. Proverbs is about fulfilling the creation mandate in a fallen world. It's about a man's work and a man's wife, and it's a father teaching his son about these things. Well, you've got lots of young men in the world today who grew up without getting that kind of proverbial wisdom from their fathers, so they don't know very much about women and marriage, and they don't know very much about work and how to make a living and how to manage money. And of course, we're not trying to replace fathers in this podcast, but we are trying to deal with some of these issues, because we do recognize that's a really big issue. So it is fundamentally a failure of fathering that has put a lot of young men in this situation. Now, you can have a variety of circumstances. You could have a father who gave very good advice and a son did something altogether different. I mean, there's different kinds of scenarios that you could concoct. But that to me, that's kind of the meta issue that ties a lot of these things together, is that if fathers were walking with their boys into manhood, they would be preparing them for a vocation. And a father doesn't have to have a vocation that's transferable to a son. Obviously, in the old days, that was very common. You would
Yeah.
grow up to do what your father did. If he's a farmer, you're going to be a farmer. If he's a blacksmith, you're probably going to be a blacksmith, and you would apprentice under your father. That's not as common today, but it doesn't have to be for fathers to do a good job in preparing their sons to go out into the world, to strike out on their own, as it were, and to go make a living, and to do
Right.
so in a way that they can provide for a family, which that's a very worthy goal. It seems like this particular scenario is presupposing our mission before marriage mantra that we've
Mhm.
used really out of Genesis 2 and out of the book of Proverbs again and again. So that's kind of my larger point here, is that a lot of what you see with directionless young men, the failure to launch phenomenon. It's really because boys have not been fathered into manhood well. And one thing I would say, if you're listening to this and you are a father, don't make that error with your own sons. Now, I'll just throw this in. This is different than the scenarios here we're going to talk about. I'll say the same thing happens with women. They are not prepared for what their central vocation is most likely going to be, which is being a wife and being a mother. In fact, we have this odd situation now where you've got young men who are obviously designed by God to be the primary providers for their home, who are not being prepared for that role to be a provider. And you've got young women growing up who are being prepared to be being pushed towards a career as if they were going to be providers. So I think that that's a really significant thing to notice, is that what we're seeing around us with a lot of the frustration of young men to find their way in life, some of that is the product of various cultural forces that are arrayed against them, no question. I do think in many ways the economy is more difficult now than it was 30 years ago or 60 years ago. At the same time, I think you've also got a lot of men who don't take advantage of the opportunities that are there because they have not prepared themselves well. Even the way in this particular scenario, the way he describes college was largely a waste of time. Well, yeah, it can be. And maybe your parents didn't understand the ways in which the economy has changed. Maybe your father pushed you towards college when really you would have been better going to trade school. Let's just say that's a
Yeah.
particular scenario. Okay, well, that obviously that was a mistake, and especially if you piled on a lot of college debt, then it's really a hard mistake to undo. But I would say you have to be smart about it. There are, as the question acknowledges, many vocations that do still require a college degree, and many vocations that men would be very suitable for, where you can make a very good living. The issue is not so much do you go to college or do you do something else, but it's having a plan, it's having a roadmap. You have to, especially when you get into those teen years. So, you know, even those early teen years, you need to be developing a game. If you're a father, you need to be developing a game plan with your son. What is your life going to look like down the road? And how can we prepare you for that? What's the best way to do that?
Yeah. Now, one of the things, and appreciate that larger perspective. One of the things that, as having pastored now and been a dad for a very long time, there are lots of details about these scenarios that would need to be known before giving specific counsel. So just so you'll know, we're giving very broad counsel here. This because we don't know the person, then a lot of the details would need to be worked out. But here, if you haven't been specifically guided by a father, maybe there are a number of scenarios. Maybe it's like, as Rich was talking about, an absentee father. Maybe your father died. Maybe there's a divorce. Maybe there's so many different scenarios in which there could be a lack of fatherly instruction. Um, and you can't control that. There are some things that you simply can't control. You can moan about it, you can complain about it, but you can't sit there and wallow in it. You have to do something. So, in growing up, I had similar situations in my own life, and had young men in my office who've gone through some very difficult things with their dads. And I said, you have two choices. Either you can just take on this victim mentality and not do anything about it, or you can let this propel you and inspire you to be a better father in the future and make something out of your life. So, just dealing with that whole fatherlessness issue, don't let that completely define your future in that victim status, if that's the case. Now, dealing with this situation, what are you going to do? What are you going to do about your situation? Well, first of all, dealing with vocations, you've got to discover your strengths and weaknesses through good friendships, through peers, through mentors. You have to find out what you're good at and what you're bad at. If you're very, and you can develop your weaknesses, but if you're not prone, if you're not prone to be more extrovert, you're probably not going to make a good salesman. There are just some guys that are just not going to make good salesmen. There are some guys who could. So you have to discover your strengths and weaknesses, and then you have to find ways to monetize your strengths. Find ways to do things with what you're good at. Now, you have to ask questions like, are you a self-starting entrepreneur type, or would you do better in an environment that is already structured, where you're more of an employee? Now, I have a couple of sons. Well, I have four sons, and a couple of those sons are very different from me, and they are very entrepreneurial. I mean, they're very out there, go-getters, take risks, high risks, and doing lots of things. And that is not passed down. That is not passed down from me. I've taken a number of risks in my life, in my vocation, but not quite like what they're doing entrepreneurially. So not all things, as Rich mentioned earlier, are passed down. Not one of my four sons at this point is preparing to be a pastor. I've got one that's a physical therapist, and in real estate, another one that's a bookkeeper and also in real estate, an engineer, and an IT. None of them is in the pastorate. So this is not passed down, but they're doing fine in what they're doing. Now, in parenting, getting to what Rich was saying, one of the things that we did as a father, and of course, along with my wife as a mother, we did the things that I was talking about earlier about the strengths and weaknesses. We discovered strengths and weaknesses that worked with the grain of our children. And what were their personalities? What were their strengths? What were their weaknesses? And then we started evaluating and training them according to those strengths and weaknesses, and directing their lives, directing their extracurricular activities, their jobs, and things like that, in order to help train them and prepare them for the future. We discovered jobs and opportunities that would provide what they would need to start a family. I had one son who was very interested in a lot of reading, very interested in history. And we got to the point where he was going to have to start choosing a vocation. And he said, I really want to be a history professor. And I said, well, that's great. That's a fine vocation. Do you want to be married and have children? Yes, I do. I said, well, there's a glut of history professors out there, and a lot of people who know a lot of history who are starving. They got good PhDs and everything.
Or working at a coffee shop.
Yeah, they're working at a coffee shop. There are lots of philosophy degrees that can tell you why you want fries with your burger, but they're starving. I said, so are there other things that you're interested in? And so we had to find other things that they were interested in. And so as parents, we had to discover strengths and weaknesses and start directing them. So if you're fathering your child, your son, if you're joined in with your wife, his mother, then you work together and find those strengths and weaknesses. Now, again, if you don't have that father or mother to help, father and mother to help, you're going to have to figure it out on your own. Now, I know that's difficult, and you're going to have to find people who can help you. And so you have to develop friendships, again, with peers and even people older than you to help you find that. And that's going to take some work. That's going to take some effort. But that is how it's going to have to be done, at least in general. And so the specifics will have to be worked out as you find out your strengths and weaknesses. Rich, you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I would just say that knowing your strengths and weaknesses is really, really crucial, because I think especially now with you got a lot of young men listening to podcasts like, say, this one. But one thing I've noticed is that there's a tendency among some podcasters in the male space to basically talk about how you don't want to just be a chump who gets a W-2. You should go out and be an entrepreneur and go start your own business. Well, the reality is Most men are not, especially younger men, are not in a position to go start their own business. They don't know enough about business to do it. There is nothing wrong with You talked about plugging yourself into a structure that already exists. There are lots of great places to work where you're a W-2 employee. And maybe that's not as exciting in some ways as being an entrepreneur, but I've seen so many over the years, people try to start businesses and it goes belly up pretty quick because they just didn't know enough about the particular business they were getting into. To be able to run a business requires a broad range of competencies. And unless your business is going to grow quickly, a lot of those, you're going to have to be doing a lot of those things because you can't afford to hire somebody else to do them. So whether that's sales, and that does take a particular personality usually. But the thing is, if you run your own business, you also are going to probably have to know something about accounting. So you just go down the list and you realize, oh, wow, there's a lot. Plus, you got to have the capital to start. So there's
Right.
just a lot of things there. And I think sometimes guys who are trying to make up for what their fathers didn't give them with the internet, oftentimes get bad advice that is not tailored to the specifics of who they are and their situation. I do think Mike Rowe, the Dirty Jobs guy, he's got some very practical advice, and he's one of those guys who's definitely pointing men to things other than college. Again, there's nothing. Think whether or not it's a good idea for a young man to go to college really again depends on a wide number of factors. That it just depends on who you are and what it is you think you want to do. But certainly there are some jobs that require a college degree, and if that's the route you want to go, then do it. But obviously, we also know that colleges hand out a lot of worthless degrees, and a lot of that is because the government got involved, which made a lot of loan money available for colleges, escalated the cost of college. Colleges started multiplying degrees that really don't have a return on investment. The whole system we've set up is really messed up. I think that colleges should have some kind of stake in the degrees they offer and the return on investment. That's something to think about. But one thing that Mike Rose says that I think is good, he says the standard advice is follow your passion. That's terrible advice because your passion may not lead to anything that is monetizable.
Right.
That's often the case, especially for a younger person. The things you're passionate about may not have any market value. So what Mike Rowe says, and I think this is good counsel, follow opportunity and bring your passion with you.
Yeah.
So you should be passionate about what you want to do or what you're doing, but it may not be something you're passionate about initially. It may be something you weren't even thinking about. But if there's an opportunity there, take it. Bring your passion with you. Bring your ambition with you. We've talked a lot about ambition on this podcast. So bring your ambition with you and then go make the most of it. I've not watched much of Mike Rowe's work, but there was the one episode I saw was a guy who started a trash collection company. He said, first I wasn't really passionate about garbage, but now after doing this for many years and building up a business, like I'm really passionate about trash collection.
Yeah.
I'm really passionate about other people's junk, their crap, basically. And so I think that's the thing you have to keep in mind. The goal is not to have a job that checks all your boxes and makes you feel totally fulfilled all the time and all of those kind of things. The main thing you want to do is find something that will use the gifts and skills that you have or that requires a skill that you can develop and that would allow you to provide adequately for your family. That's what you're looking for. I think there is and this really started, I think, with our generation, Bill, with Gen X, maybe the boomers some too, but the whole idea that your work is going to be incredibly fulfilling and rewarding every day. That's an idea that is completely unhistorical. Nobody ever would have thought that. And the only reason that we got that idea is because we created an economy that was so prosperous and did allow for so many sort of niche type jobs that people thought, oh, I can go find something that not only pays really well, but something that I'm going to love every day. And I'm going to wake up excited about doing it every day. Your great-great-grandfather who went to work in a coal mine, like if you had asked him, do you find fulfillment in your work? He would have said, like, what are you talking about? The thing is, I would have said, the coal miner should also bring his passion and his ambition with him. And he should seek to, as Colossians 3:23 says, do his work to the Lord and do it with excellence. Proverbs talks about competence in your craft. He should go be the best possible coal miner he could be. But if you talk about trying to find fulfillment in that, he would have just said, the fulfillment I get isn't providing for my family. I was made to work. God made me for dominion. This is the kind of dominion that he's called me to take. But it's not really so much about the fact that I enjoy it every day. It's that this is what I do out of love to provide for my family. And I think sometimes, particularly again with young people, it's very possible to be overly romantic about the kind of work you're going to do. And the reality is, you need to be very practically minded when it comes to. You need to be very practically minded about college. Like if you go to college, you need to treat your studies like a job, and you need to focus
Mhm.
on gaining marketable skills as much and moving in that kind of direction, something that can be monetized. And I think we need to get away from this idea that, oh, work is something I'm going to enjoy every day. There's no matter what job you have, there are going to be things about your job you don't like, and there are going to be things about
Yeah.
your job that are hard for you, or maybe are outside of your wheelhouse a little bit, and that's okay. The fact that work may entail some kind of suffering or trial, that there may be days where you sort of dread going to work, going into the office or to the coal mine or whatever it might be. That's okay. That's just part of life, and even that is part of the discipline God's imposing on you to train you and make you into the kind of man he wants you to be. So, one thing I would say about all of these scenarios we're looking at is you got to purge out the bad ideas that we have about work today.
Yeah.
And you need to understand what it is you're really trying to accomplish. I know many men who have lots and lots of skills and have never figured out a way to monetize them.
Yeah.
Well, so those skills may be fine as hobbies, or um, they may be productive in other kinds of ways, but they don't provide a living. And so
Right.
that's something you have to keep in mind constantly, is to be focused on productivity. And in our economy today, that means figuring out where there are holes in the market that you can fill, or figuring out where there are opportunities, where there are certain kinds of job opportunities, and do it. Um, so that again, my advice is kind of more global than it is specific to this certain scenario that's been given. But I think those are the kinds of things that young men need to be thinking about.
Well, yeah, and I think you're right too, as far as probably starting some with Gen X, but certainly in the millennial and Gen Z, there's this following your passion type thing, and really uh, that whole idea that you have to feel good about what you're doing all the time can be troublesome in in actually providing for your family because it's like you mentioned, it's
Yeah.
never always going to feel good. It's never always going to be great. I remember Rush Limbaugh saying, "Do what you love, and you'll never work a day in your life." And he was doing what he loved and that kind of thing. And I think again, that was like you were mentioning, that's some bad advice for the majority of people. Is because there are going to be times, and
But
my grandfather worked in the steel mill. My great grandfather worked mule skidding, which was pulling logs with mules. And that, if like you said, if you were to go ask them, do you find that fulfilling? It's like, what does that even mean? I'm providing for my family, and that's what I've been called to do, and I'm going to
right.
do everything I can to do that. And so you've
The-
got to at sometimes forget your feelings and just do the work.
yeah, yeah, it's responsibility over feelings.
Yeah.
Because your bills don't care about your feelings.
That's
Um,
exactly right.
Rush Limbaugh is saying, "Do what you love, and you'll never work a day in your life." I mean, there's the occasional situation where that happens. I mean, I don't doubt that Rush Limbaugh loved what he did, but there's only one Rush Limbaugh. There's a handful of people out there who maybe do attain to that, or become independently wealthy and can spend all day doing what they want, that kind of thing. But that's not going to be most people. Most people are going to have to be much more practically minded. But the other thing I would say is that whatever your vocation is, there's a really good chance that you can learn to love it,
Hmm.
or learn at least learn to love certain aspects of it. And that's kind of that example I was giving about the guy who had a trash collection business. I mean, it wasn't something that he loved at first, but he grew into it and grew to love it. And I think that can happen some too. But just recognize we live in a fallen world. There are going to be thorns and thistles in whatever job you do. And
Yeah.
so that's just something that you have to be prepared for. Just because you have hard days at work doesn't mean you're in the wrong place.
Right.
I would also say that the earlier in life, and this is more kind of global advice, but the earlier in life, you can also figure out how to manage your money well. The earlier in life you can figure out how to budget, how to save, how to invest, the better off you're going to be.
Yes.
Now, obviously, when you're first starting out, you probably don't have anything. You probably don't have much money to invest. But if you can just figure that out as you go and be aggressive in pursuing competency and money management, that will also really help you, because then even if you don't make as much money maybe as you'd hoped, you can make that money go further. And I, again, understand there are challenges with our current economy and
I know.
the so-called affordability crisis and that kind of thing, but it doesn't matter. Thinking of yourself as a victim of larger forces is not going to make you more productive, and it's not going to solve the problem either. There is no easy fix. There's no quick solution. There's no help on the way, so to speak. You just have to make the most of what the situation is. And
Yeah.
so figuring out how to navigate that is really, really crucial.
No.
We're not going to fix the problems we're in overnight. So
Right.
if you're a young man listening to this today, it's very likely that there will be certain economic constraints that you have to deal with for the rest of your life. And that doesn't, I know there's all kinds of thoughts on what's going to happen with AI and that kind of thing. And maybe that's going to be great for the economy. Maybe it's going to be terrible. I mean, I don't think anybody really knows with absolute certainty, but thinking of yourself as a victim is not going to help you become more productive, and it's not going to help you make ends meet. You just have to say, okay, these are the challenges I'm faced with. These are the obstacles. I've got to go face them and deal with them as best I can and make the most out of the situation God has given to me. The one other thing I would say is that your parents can still, particularly your father, if he's someone that you would trust, would be worth going to get counsel from. But I would also say it's really good to find mentors who can help
Mhm.
you in this area. Maybe it's an elder in your church who you respect and who's obviously made good decisions with his life. And like Hebrews 13 says, you can consider the outcome of his life and want to imitate it because you see the fruit that's there. That can be a very helpful thing. I would also think along those lines. Like if you're trying to
Yeah.
figure out what should I do with my life and what should I do with my particular situation and all that, I would say find somebody who has done those things, who is ahead of you in life, who is where you want to get to,
Yeah.
and see if they can't sit down with you and help draw a roadmap that would get you there.
That's a good point, because even as a father, uh, and not being omnicompetent in everything, we directed our children toward people who were skilled in the areas that they wanted to be in. And our sons especially, um, were mentored by people with certain skills, and we just had them spend time with them. And some of our sons just gained friendships with people who were 50 years older than them because they just learned skills with these people. And so, and you can't be threatened by that as a father. You have to do what's best for your child and your son. So you do those types of things for them. So that's good counsel. Let's go ahead and go to the next scenario, and we might have similar advice here, but a young father is 27. So this is difference. This was an 18-year-old before, but this is a young father now. Obviously married. He's 27 years old. He was in the Army as an artilleryman for 9 years and is leaving the service. He's married with 4 children, ages 1 to 6. He has $50,000 in savings from military time and does not want to work in government, but is worried that he is behind the power curve since his work experience is not directly transferable, and he has the weight of the family on him already. So what does he do? Rich, do you have any counsel for him?
Well, if you're in the military, it's interesting that there are two books that I really enjoyed reading over, let's just say, I mean, I don't remember what year even these books came out. There was J.D. Vance's book, Hillbilly Elegy.
Yeah.
There was also Rob Henderson's book. I think it's called Troubled. Both of those are very interesting memoirs written by men who are, they're not older men. They're writing
Right.
these memoirs on the earlier side compared to when you usually write memoirs, which is kind of towards the tail end. But both of them found in I mean, basically both would say that the Army played a huge role
Hmm.
in getting them on the right track. And so again, I would ask some questions here about this man's military career. In the Hillbilly Elegy book, Vance talks about how when he got a big bonus at one point, he was going to go blow it on a new car. And one of his higher ups was like, "No, you're not." Basically said, "No, you're going to save this money. Just because you got money doesn't mean you go spend it." But he had grown up obviously in a situation where things like money management and long-term thinking were not a part of the family culture, really.
Right.
So he had to learn that. The military helped teach him. It taught him the discipline. It taught him, and it wasn't just even um, going to boot camp, but it was also just kind of being around men who kind of figured some things out, who could share that wisdom with him. Trouble doesn't advance, obviously, eventually became a Roman Catholic. I don't think the same is true of Henderson. I don't think he's a Christian, but he definitely became more conservative, and his story is very interesting. The book is entitled Troubled, I believe, and he definitely had a very troubled childhood. But again, the military played a major role in helping him sort of figure out life. And so I would say, look at your military experience. What have you gleaned from it? One thing that I have noticed is that there are a lot of employers who like to hire somebody who's
Yeah.
come out of the military
Mm.
for that very reason.
Yep.
And obviously, those employers know when they hire somebody who's been in the military for several years, they may not have the specific skill that is needed to do the job, but they assume that if the man has done well in the military, he can learn the skills that are needed to do this job, and he's going to have the discipline and structure in his life and that kind of thing that will make him a good employee. So I think that's the thing for this guy to figure out is, do you stay in the military until you can get retirement and then figure out basically a second career, or do you go ahead and see what the opportunities might be for you if you were to enter into civilian life? And again, there are a lot of employers out there who love to hire men who have been in the military. So
Yeah.
you could look at that.
Well, having family members and having pastored people in military careers, I'd say first of all, this man, 27 years old, he has decisions to make. He's been in the military 9 years already. He could just stay in the military for another 11 years and retire and have a steady income while still being young enough to
Right.
train for another career. And I've seen that happen. You get in the military at 18 and you retire at 38, and you're retiring with full benefits, whatever rank you are. And 38, you're able to start another career, and you have a lot of other benefits that go with that. So uh, now, if you, like you were saying, if you want to just get out and start another career before you hit that retirement age, like you mentioned, there are a lot of employers who want to hire uh, ex-military simply because of their discipline, because they're employers who want employees actually to show up to work and do the job. And they're having a hard time doing that. We've got a business owner in our church right now. He's a construction guy. He can't find guys to show up to work. He can't find guys who can nail two boards together. You got a guy who can come in and can learn something. He can develop skills quickly in construction and electricity and things like that. So there are ways to, and there are employers looking for people who will just show up and are willing to learn and who are able to learn. So being in the military is not, again, you may have not developed a specific skill in the military, but you have developed disciplines that will carry over, like you were mentioning.
Well, and you may have developed, say, some leadership skills
Yes.
that would be very valuable. So it is true. You may feel like you've got to play catch up with men who got into with a particular company or a particular line of work, say at 18 or 22. But the reality is, you're also probably going to have learned some things that they didn't through your military experience. They may
Right.
be more intangibles. But again, that's the thing. You don't, what I would tell this person is, don't undersell yourself.
Right.
Don't think that, well, my time in the military has put me behind the curve. Uh, I mean, maybe in certain ways, but maybe ahead of the curve in others. So don't sell yourself short.
I've also known military men to get out and go into the civilian world and work and become very frustrated at the lack of discipline all around them.
Yeah.
What are these people doing? They don't
Yeah.
show up. They don't do their job. They don't do this. And so there's that aspect. I know he wasn't asking about that, but one of the, as a disciplined young man going into a job, if you're there, show up, and you're willing to learn, you will rise quickly in the company. That's
Yeah.
just hard for
Yeah,
you.
I think that's exactly right. And the one other thing I would say is that if you are a very ambitious and disciplined young man today, you probably will stand out
Yeah.
wherever you work. because I hate to put it this way, but there's not a whole lot of competition.
Right.
And that's not true across the board. If you're going to high finance, I mean, obviously all those people are driven and all, but there's so much fluff in corporate America that if you're really disciplined, you're hardworking, you're diligent, you're seeking to do your work with excellence and with competence. You're the one who volunteers to do stuff or who takes on a lead role for a project or something like that. I'm not saying that's going to always get you noticed because we know that always doesn't always work that way, and especially in a DEI world that we still haven't fully escaped. There may be other things working against you, but I would say you're still going to stand out because there's so many young men today that are not driven, not ambitious, not hardworking. That if you are those things, it is going to make you stand out to an employer,
Yeah,
and that's
absolutely.
really what you want to do is find someone who will recognize that and who will reward that.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, let's deal with this third scenario. There may be some overlap here. Father of four works as an estimator for a large construction company making 75,000 a year. The company is not a woke megacorp, but he is also not feeling like his efforts are leading to the furthering of the Dominion mandate besides providing for the family at home. There isn't a lot of upward mobility in that job, and the internet seems to say go start a business to build wealth. Where does he go from here? You want to start or you want me to
Yeah.
start?
So I would tell this man's a father of four, so he's not really a young man anymore. But I would say again, don't undersell yourself. I think your efforts probably are contributing
Yeah.
to the Dominion mandate. So don't just assume that what you're doing is not. On the other hand, a family of four with a $75,000 salary, depending on where you live, that may be fine, or that may seem like it's not enough. So the thing about that scenario that really stood out is that there's not much upward mobility in the company. Like
Right.
if you kind of hit your ceiling, I think that's where you do start to kind of look around and see what other kind of opportunities there might be. And that's something that if you are in a situation where you have hit the ceiling and there's no further upward mobility, that's where I think it's
Yeah.
perfectly appropriate to think about where else can I deploy myself where there would be more upward mobility, where if I worked a little bit, say a few more hours per week or something like that, I could really uh, push that income into another tier.
Yeah. Well, in all of these, especially this one, especially as a father for married, you in switching careers, you always have to do this cost benefit analysis. If you're not just going to transfer to another job, you got to make sure your wife is on board all along the way because you don't want to overly stress her. She's got to be a part of this mission. They had because she's got to support you because she's got to keep the kids and all these things. Uh, they've become accustomed to a certain standard of living. If $75,000, if you're in rural America, that may be really good money. If you're in urban America, they may have, or the West Coast or the Northeast, that's going to be you can make more being a trash collector. So there's that factor, as Rich mentioned. But your family has become accustomed to a certain standard of living. The question is about your wife. Is she willing to make sacrifices for you to pursue something else? And is that sacrifice worth the potential benefit? Can
Yeah, I would say that men fall in two categories. They're too eager to take on risk or they're too risk averse. And wisdom is finding the right balance. So this scenario points out, it says the internet seems to say go start a business. That's where I would say you might have learned a lot of skills as an estimator that would transfer over into being some kind of entrepreneur. And maybe you've noticed some weak link in the supply chain that you could start a business and go fill it.
yeah,
And I would say, great. Now make sure you've got all your ducks in a row if you're going to go start a business, because again, that's a high risk, high reward kind of thing. But you want to make sure that I wouldn't try to talk somebody out of it if they've really got the skills to do it, but just
right,
make sure that you know what you're doing. If you start a business, you'll certainly learn a lot as you go, but make sure you've got the basics down so you know how to run a business. But that's the thing. I would say wherever you are, wherever you're working, pay attention and learn as much as you can from the people around you, particularly the people who are above you in the corporation.
right,
Go to one of the higher ups in your company and say, "Hey, I'm really impressed with how you do X, Y, and Z. Or there's some things you could teach me about this."
yeah,
We've got a guy here that runs 1819 News. I think I've talked about him before, Brian Dawson, and he's got a whole interesting life story. But he got into the radio business, but basically said, to somebody who was very good at kind of everything. Who had hired him for a particular job, but who was very understood the business as a whole, and basically said, "Yeah, I want to do this job, but while I'm here, I want you to teach me everything you know, so I can run my own media company someday." And that's what, and he just absorbed a lot. And
Mm.
so there are reservoirs of wisdom in people around you that you need to tap into. When Proverbs says wisdom is found in a multitude of counselors, all wisdom comes from God, but God deposits that wisdom in people.
Yeah.
Nobody's got all the wisdom, but find people who've got wisdom in particular areas and go tap into that wisdom. See how much of that wisdom they'll share with you,
Right.
and absorb as much of that wisdom as you can. Take notes. Um, Learn all that you can from people who have skills that you don't have, or who have knowledge about some facet of a business that you don't, or just some facet about running a business that you don't have. And we've talked in this podcast about how, in a sense, dominion means being a well-rounded man. It means gaining as many skills and competencies as you can, absorbing as much wisdom about as much of the world as you can. And I would say in any of these scenarios, but particularly in this last one, thinking about this man who's a father of four, working as an estimator, you're working in one little piece of the business, but there are all these other pieces. How much can you learn? How much can you drink in from everything else that's going on around you in the company, and just learn about the business as a whole? And maybe you get to that point where, hey, you know what? I feel like I've learned enough about this business. I would say if you're an estimator, there's a good chance you do know a lot about the business as a whole, because your job is basically to price things. Maybe you are in a position where you could go start your own
Hmm.
construction company of some sort. But make sure that, I would say this to any young person, pick up as much wisdom as you can. Pick up as
Yeah.
much wisdom along the way as you can. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Don't be afraid to sort of apprentice yourself to someone if they're willing to let you kind of do that for a season. I think absorbing as much knowledge and wisdom as you can from others is absolutely crucial to success.
Yeah, and something you mentioned earlier, though, I mean, just not everybody's cut out to start and run a business. I sat down with another one of our business owners who's a great mechanic. People bring their diesel engines to him from all over America to work on, and he's just superb as a mechanic. But he also knows how to run a business. And I was talking to him at lunch not too long ago, and he was talking about a fellow mechanic who was an excellent mechanic and wanted to start a business, but had no skills in starting a business.
Mm.
And he failed miserably. And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
you can be really good at a craft, but there's a Peter principle in there, which is you can rise to the level of your incompetence. And so you got to be careful. You got to know it's not a problem to take a risk, but have people around you, like you were talking about with the counselors, have people around you who are telling you, hey, you know what? I don't know if you have the skills to do that. Because some people want to start businesses for all the wrong reasons. They think I want to govern my own time. I want to have my own income and not worry about, I don't want to submit to the man, all those types of things. And they find out that it's not like that. You're actually working a lot more than you would have if you were working for somebody else. And you don't have the free time that you thought you were
Yeah.
going to have and all those types of things. So just be careful about that whole idea about starting a business.
Yeah, that's a great example. If you're going to say open up a mechanic shop, you've got to know a lot more than just how to fix cars. You got to
Right.
know that, but you've also got to know the business side of it. And that means dealing with employees, it means dealing with taxes, dealing with payroll, marketing. There's so many things. And that's typically going to be a smaller business, which means more of that's going to fall to you. You're not, so the thing about corporate America, and this gets back to the guy that's an estimator in that particular scenario, he's the larger the corporation, the more specialized the job.
Right.
And there's good and bad that comes with that. What I would tell, and again, this kind of echoes some things we talked about in this podcast before, but what I would say is that every man ought to strive to be a generalist and a specialist. So, and oftentimes it's going to be being a specialist in some area is going to be how you make your money. You get good at something, you get specialized in it. That's how you make your money. That skill of being an estimator, that's a very specific skill, and most people are not going to have that.
Right.
You might have a guy who's good at construction, but has never done estimating work. Well, he didn't know how to price out a job. All it takes is mispricing one job, and you're out of business. I mean, that's
Exactly.
the reality. That's why a lot of people in construction don't make it because they don't know how to estimate. But the estimator's also got to know something about the other facets of the business if he wants to go start a construction company on his own. So in corporate America, you tend to have these very specialized jobs, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with being a cog in a larger machine. I mean, think about the body of Christ. We're members of the
Right.
body. There's no one member of the body of Christ who's good at everything, who's so good that he can say, I can do this all. I don't need you. Paul's whole illustration is that the to be a member of the body of Christ is to be in a number of interdependent relationships, not relationship. You're not independent. This is really key. You're not independent. You can't go it alone. Neither are you just dependent, as if you
Right.
relied on other people to do everything for you. You're interdependent, which means there are some things they need from you and some things you need from them. That's how life in the body of Christ works. And corporations were actually in many ways patterned after that model of the church that scripture gives us. We call corporations from the
Yeah.
word corpus, meaning
Right.
body. That's the whole
Yeah.
idea. Corporation is one body with many members, and the eye and the ear and the mouth and the hand and the foot are all different members of the body, the corporation. And it's okay if you're specialized in one thing, if you're a hand or an eye, that's great. But I would also say that men should strive to be generalists in the sense that it's good to know a little something about everything.
Right.
This is true of life in general, not just work, but you should strive to be a generalist. You need to know something about history. You should know something about science. You should know something about car repair. You should know something about home repair. You should know something about computers. You can go on and on with the list. And yes, that's daunting. And again, the idea is not to discourage anyone and say, well, I'm never going to be good at all. You don't have to be great at any of those things. It's
Right.
okay to be, now we use the saying, jack of all trades, master of none. I would say jack of all trades, master one. Okay, master some trade that will make you a living. But you also find yourself with many more opportunities in life. You will find yourself able to save more money if you will develop range and develop as many competencies as you can. And that's really something that we've talked about again and again in this podcast. But I think it's really, really important. So that'd be a question for this estimator. Have you been developing range? Have you been developing
Yeah.
other skills to go along with your estimate? That's a great skill to have. And if you were to go start your business, say a construction business, having that estimating skill is crucial. Somebody in your business would have to have that skill, but you've got to have a lot of other skills. So you got to
Yeah.
be something of a generalist if you're going to start. You got to be a specialist and a generalist at the same time.
All right. Well, I hope that helped. We only got through one of those questions, but in our defense, there were three parts to that question. So we're going to wrap this episode up and then come back in our next episode and deal with several more questions. But until then, we encourage you, get to work.